Great. Well, thank you all so much. And thank you for the monthly meeting committee and our wonderful keynote speakers for being here today. Again, we just have very brief IWB announcements to get us started. So we did want to give a brief update on the organizational structure of IWB. As you know, or hopefully some of you may know that we started in 2020 as just a very small group that exploded and became an international community, which has been growing ever since over the last 3 years. We're now officially a nonprofit organization incorporated in the United States, which is so exciting. And we have a wonderful team of volunteers. Thank you to everybody who's been participating in our recent elections. And we just kind of wanted to give an update that we have 4 pillars. One is really sustaining the organization so that it can continue on beyond just the founding group. The other is to provide support for members. Part of that is this monthly meeting committee. Another is community outreach, making sure that women in biomechanics are visible and are cited in the research and kind of are out there for all of our biomechanics community. And then, of course, we want to empower allyship amongst our entire community of biomechanists as well. And we have a great initiative led by Katie Knaus nominating women for biomechanics awards. So thank you again for voting in elections. Caitlin Banks is going to continue as our treasurer and Ashley Collymore is going to continue as our secretary. I'm continuing as president, but we are looking for our next president. So if you are interested or if you know somebody who may be a really good fit in terms of a leadership position for a nonprofit organization, please email me at president@intwomenbiomech.org. I also want to say we have fabulous updates monthly through our newsletter. We just got our first new newsletter editor, Marnie Wasserman. She's in Michigan at the United States as well. And if you're not receiving newsletter updates, email us and we can get you on the listserv. I hope you're also checking in on our Twitter, again, boosting the visibility of women's science. We have Papers of the Quarter led by Freya Watson, and we just highlighted Sydney Bodden-Distel's recent paper, and it is fabulous. So please interact, like, retweet, etc. with that. And I don't know if Sarah's on, but Dr. Sarah Roker recently wrote a fantastic blog. It's a must read, especially for new parents or parents in biomechanics. So definitely go check out our website for that. And then just a big congratulations for all the Women Biomechanics Outreach winners, and a huge thanks to Bertech and the Biomechanics Initiative, National Biomechanics Day, for supporting Women in Biomechanics Outreach. And I see some of the winners here today too during the meeting. So thank you for joining and interacting with IWB. And then I'm going to pass it to Rachel, who's our new IWB conference coordinator, to kind of talk about upcoming summer conferences.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I am our new conference coordinator for IWB. So really hoping to help facilitate meetups at conferences, whether you just want to get to know women you've only met virtually, or you're attending a conference and you potentially don't know anyone there. We kind of want to help you meet up with other IWB members in person, and we're gearing up on summer conference season. The top thing is, if you're on our Slack channel, I highly recommend you join the conference meetup channel. Women are using this channel to just like connect, ask if other people are going to be at certain conferences, coordinate maybe travel beforehand, afterhand, things like that. And the 2 main conferences we're planning events at this summer are ISB in Japan, I believe in late July, and we're helping with an official event there that Advancing Women in Biomechanics is putting on, focused on intersectionality. And they're looking for women to help facilitate and plan that event. So if you're interested in that, please reach out to me. Feel free to do that on Slack. I don't know, message me here in this meeting. And then we're also looking to do social meetups both there and at ASB this summer. So yeah, keep an eye out for upcoming events at summer conferences. And yeah, hope to see you all in person somewhere this summer.
I cannot wait. Thank you so much, Rachel. I can't wait to see you all in person, or as many of you as I can in person. Thank you. And thank you to all our volunteers for keeping IWB going and making it what it is. You are an awesome community. So with that, I will pass it to Anna Maria to do our wonderful introductions.
Thank you. Last October, we had a meeting where our members presented their work. Those presentations were very ANCA focused, showing how interested our members were in ANCA biomechanics. I'm also passionate about this topic. My personal interest goes back to my PhD years where I examined the function of a deep ANCA plantar flexor muscle named flexor hallucis longus. I got fascinated about the interaction between deep and the superficial ANCA plantar flexor muscle in healthy and clinical populations. After some work with Achilles tendon ruptured patients, now my research focuses on Achilles tendinopathy, and I try to understand this clinical condition using a variety of ultrasound-based methods. These methods and more will be covered by the presentation of Professor Taija Finni and Professor Benedicte Vanwanseele, who will soon present their very recent review paper that has recently been published in Journal of Biomechanics. The title of this review is Towards Modern Understanding of the Achilles tendon Properties in Human Movement Research. But first, let me introduce our speakers. Professor Taija Finni was my former doctoral and postdoctoral supervisor. Currently, she is a professor of kinesiology and the vice dean responsible of education at the Faculty of Sports and Health Sciences, University of Jyväskylä in Finland. Her ongoing research project focused on Achilles tendon function in health and disease, physical activity and adaptation to exercise in young people with cerebral palsy. Professor Finni has over 130 peer-reviewed publications in international scientific journals and more than 7,000 citations. She is an active member and fellow of the International Society of Biomechanics and has served as editor and editorial board member in several journals. And now I introduce Dr. Benedicte Vanwanseele. She is a professor at the Faculty of Movement and Rehabilitation Science at the Human Movement Biomechanics Research Group at the KU Leuven in Belgium. She is also the head of this research group. Professor Vanwanseele focused her research on developing insights and innovative methodology to achieve personalized rehabilitation and training regimes with the ultimate goal of enabling each of us, young and old, to perform optimally through physical activity. She has over 170 peer-reviewed publications in international scientific journals and almost 5,000 citations. Professor Vanwanseele is also involved in the implementation of evidence-based methods to improve training programs for elite athletes, such as the Red Lions, and is a co-founder of a spin-off company, Run Easy. Thank you very much, Professor Finni and Professor Vanwanseele, for accepting our invitation to this meeting, and we are very excited to hear your presentations. The presentation will be about 20-30 minutes long, and IWB members, please ask questions in the chat, and we will have some time to address these topics at the end of our meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much for the overwhelming introductions. And we're very proud to be here. There's a series of reviews in various biomechanics journals related to the 50-year celebration of ISB. And so in this talk, we do talk about the science in this, but we start with sort of a background, how this review came about, and a little bit share our journeys in biomechanics as well, why we are here. So there will be exciting things to read in various journals, comprehensive reviews about various biomechanics topics. And how we got to do this review was because John Chalice is one editor of one issue, and he, in July last year, he wrote an invitation to me to write a review on human Achilles tendon properties. And he said that I could do it alone, or I could ask co-writers. And I gave it some time to think that should I go ahead and do it myself, but I think it's so boring to work alone, and group work is much more enjoyable. So I fully support peer support, and in this respect, I did not had a chance to work with Benedicte before in writing. So, but we had interacted in other occasions, and the work she had done, I thought that it's a good match to do this review. So she came on board, and we set out the plan to write it during the fall, and December it was supposed to be finished, and we got submitted. We submitted the review on time, but it takes time, and professors are typically busy people. You have to really set aside the time to do the work. But why we were asked to do this, perhaps because we both have a track record in tendon research. I did my PhD looking at muscle tendon interaction, measured in vivo tendon forces from Achilles and patella tendon, and these were perhaps the first in vivo force velocity curves from humans at that time. And then I did my postdoc at UCLA, where we looked more closely the Achilles tendon aponeurosis function in health and in injured individuals. And after that, I have collaborated with several people across the world, looking various aspects of muscle tendon interaction and Achilles tendon. Here's an example of foot mass and my work. This is a picture from review. And then also here in Jyväskylä, I have good team of PhD students who have continued to do the work on this research line. Then Benedicte.
Yeah, thank you, Taija. And I also really enjoyed working together with Taija, and was very happy that she invited me to join her doing this review. My track record actually started on different places on this planet, and also with different places research-wise. So just as an introduction, I did my master's in Belgium, where I'm now at also, but I traveled to Aalborg University for a master thesis more on motor control and the sit-to-stand transition, and did my PhD at the ETH in Zurich, which was on immobilization in people with spinal cord injury and the effects of immobilization on articular cartilage. So I didn't really get to do any tendon research till quite later on in my research career. After my PhD at the ETH, I traveled to Australia and spent there 6 years working on investigating different type of mechanical interventions, I call them, to change the loading on tissue in general and mainly on articular cartilage at that time, to see how tissue can adapt in humans due to interventions. And then since 2010, traveled back to my alma mater, and I've been at KU Leuven since then, working on muscle and tendon interaction. So, and then more specifically, I looked, or together with a couple of PhD students, we investigated how muscle tendon interaction contributes to performance, endurance, so looking at running economy and how the tendon elasticity can contribute actually to improving endurance. And then power, where we looked at jumping, counter movement, jumps, quad jumps, how the tendon is not only acting as a spring, but also changes muscle fascicle length and so on. So that's where my interest in that type of research, or where my research started. And now I'm mainly focused on looking at altered muscle and tendon properties on tendon strains during recovery of Achilles tendinopathy, where really want to look at how the muscle and the tendon interact and the tendon properties changing due to the injury and how that affects the loading. So more and more towards the tendon specific and how these adapt to rehabilitation and sport science, sport exercises. Yeah. You're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, we think Achilles tendon is very important, but how did it all start? So in 1960s, Cavagna co-workers especially did studies on efficiency of running, and they realized that there must be some mechanism to save energy, and it was identified as elastic recoil energy that they assumed that came from a stretched and contracted muscle. But later on, in the earlier 70s and to the late 70s, this is now from Alexander and Bennett, who showed that it's not the muscle cannot contribute so much to the elastic recoil, but if it's attached to a long tendon, such as Achilles tendon, the energy savings can be like quite substantial. So that's why it became evident that Achilles tendon has an important role for locomotion and efficiency and performance as well. For human Achilles tendon properties that this review is about, really the first measurements of in vivo human tendon properties were in 1999 when ultrasound method was used by Maganaris and Paul to measure stiffness and Young's modulus in tibialis anterior muscle. And shortly after, also the Danish group, Peter Magnusson, published papers on Achilles tendon properties, and it started to explode from there on. So what the tendons actually are? Tendons comprise of cells which synthesize and degrade matrix components. So the extracellular matrix components that the tendon cells produce contain fibers, various collagen fibers, especially type 1 provides the tensile strength. They are cross-linked, which change with age. For example, And then there are other fibers as well, for example, elastin, that is important. Then there are also non-fibrous matrix components, glycoproteins, proteoglycans that provide, serve various functions that provide the tendon the unique properties they have. And when we are studying human tendons, we look at it more on a macro scale. And from cadaver studies, it's long known about the twisted structure of the tendon, but now modeling studies and ultrasound studies have enabled to look these issues more closely. So we started with the literature review in this, and when well, this was a PubMed search, not really a systematic review, but when we did a search with Achilles tendon keywords, and these are now what are these word clouds from every 10 years, from 1970s, and then 80s, 90s, 20s, and 21. We see that in each era there is a treatment and rupture occurs. So that has been one of the most important factors that has been studied regarding Achilles tendon, because although it is strong, it's also susceptible to rupture. Then Achilles tendon properties. Of course, collagen is the important ingredient in a tendon, providing strength. But regarding this, only in the 2000s, we see that there appears human studies. Of course, cadaver studies, but in vivo human studies have only appeared after the appearance of ultrasonography methods.
Yeah. So then we had a look at what properties we're gonna define Achilles tendon, and we came with the properties are, of course, stress, strain, stiffness, Young's modulus, and hysteresis. And how are these measurements, or how are these measured at the moment or in the more recent work? So Achilles tendon properties are assessed by using force measures on one side and then tracking the tissue motion, as in the tendon motion. And if you look at the literature at the moment, you can measure this in a static way, and you can measure it in a dynamic way. So if we first have a look at the static isometric contractions that are often being used, the force assessments that are used there are mainly the optic fiber tendon force transducer, which was introduced by mainly the group of Comey. And in the earlier years, which gives you a value for your force, Achilles tendon force, a direct value for the Achilles tendon force. And then, of course, you also have quite some studies that use force transducers. External forces are being measured in that way, using or a dynamometer or a force plate underneath the feet. And if you, of course, have force and you have the cross-sectional area, you will be able to measure your stress in the tendon. On the other hand, we have looked at the literature that measured, or how at the moment, or in more recent research, the tendon motion is being, or the tendon length is being measured and tracked throughout these forceful contractions. And there it's mainly ultrasound that is being used at the moment where you can decide where you're gonna, or there is some discrepancy between different studies, where you can track the free tendon movement, which is actually the insertion of the soleus onto the tendon, and then you have the tendon free of any muscles. So tracking the length changes in the Achilles tendon, it's important that you track the calcaneus insertion and then of course the proximal part of the tendon, which can be defined by the muscle, the soleus insertion to the muscle, or in a lot of studies also the muscle tendon junction of the medial gastrocnemius. So that's another part of the tendon that you actually are measuring. And then of course there are some studies that also measure the length changes in the tendon as well as the aponeurosis. And then that is done by tracking the movement of the fascicles cross-section in the muscle. So then there, it's important to realize that you're not measuring only the tendon, but also the tendon and the aponeurosis elongation. So it's clear that you get different values from these different techniques. If you then have the tendon length changes, you have the tendon length, then you can talk about strains in the tendon. To get to your stiffness, you will use, or stiffness or Young's modulus, you will use the linear section of this graph. So the stress and versus the strain in the linear region is then defined as a stiffness, the Young's modulus. If you do force versus elongation, you will calculate the stiffness of the Achilles tendon. If you then also not only look at the loading of the tendon, but also the unloading, and Taija will go a little bit more in detail later on, you can look at the hysteresis. So this is in general how at the moment Achilles tendon properties are assessed during an isometric contraction. You can also do that in dynamic situations, so during movements, and that's mainly done during walking and running. And there you in general see that ultrasonography is used to track the tissue displacement. So you see two probes here, one tracking the calcaneus insertion and one tracking again, or the soleus insertion to the tendon or the muscle tendon junction in the medial gastrocnemius, or your aponeurosis tracking. So there you can track the same points as you do during that isometric contraction. Here in this case, muscle forces are being estimated from ground reaction forces in combination with kinematics to estimate the tendon force through inverse dynamics and then also your moment arm calculations.
Of the properties, the hysteresis is perhaps least reported. Stiffness and Young's modulus and strain are much more frequently reported. And some time ago, we wrote a paper summarizing the hysteresis values from literature. And in various animal studies, the hysteresis hovers around 10%. And low values of hysteresis is beneficial because it tells about energy lost in the stretch shortening cycle of the tendon. And however, when ultrasonography studies in humans started to appear after 2000s, the hysteresis values that were reported are quite variable, and extraordinary high values have also been reported. And the variability suggests that there's some there could be some non-physiological issues in the measurement of hysteresis. And one reason could be the difficulty in assessing the tendon force. So here we compiled factors to consider when assessing the Achilles tendon force.
Yes, and then so we looked at how, so Kumi's group, of course, could measure it directly. And however, at the moment, if you want to do it non-invasively, it's a way to do it through the external force. So you get your ankle, your force, and then your point of force application times your moment arm gives you your external force. Of course, during an isometric contraction, most of the times you have also ankle movement. If any of you have ever done this, you kind of, independent of how hard you strap the person to the foot plate, there will always be some motion. So there's no real isometric contraction. And that movement of the ankle causes actually two types of errors. One of the error is that your Achilles tendon moment arm will change, which you also have to estimate. There are multiple ways to estimate Achilles tendon moment arms. You have tendon excursion measurements, but you also have ultra base measurements. And that is a static moment arm, but if there is an ankle movement, that moment arm will also change. And in addition, you also have a misalignment from your dynamometer to the foot or the ankle axis. So your dynamic joint axis rotation changes relative to your ankle axis. So that will also cause an error in your measurement. And a group of Arampasi actually has shown that there can be a difference of about 6 to 10% of a difference between the plantar flexor, the real net plantar flexor moment, and the plantar flexor moment measured by your isometric isokinetic dynamometer. So there can be different ways that there are mistakes done there. And of course, we all try to correct for these, but we need to realize that there are possible errors. A second part that is also important is that if you isometrically contract, you will most of the time not only contract your plantar flexors or the 3 plantar flexors that attach to the Achilles tendon, so your gastrocnemius and your soleus, but there will be also synergetic muscle activity, so other muscles that also contribute to the plantar flexion moment. And in addition, there are antagonistic muscle, or there can be antagonistic muscle activities, which will also contribute to that net plantar flexor moment. So the synergetic muscle activities and that other end can be demonstrated or was demonstrated here by also a study of Taija's group. Taija, you want to explain or?
Sure. So what you see here is a case A and case B, where we have tracked medial gastrocnemius tendon elongation, and then estimated the tendon force during isometric contraction. And this is in a typical condition. They go hand in hand. But this is a case in a patient with Achilles tendon rupture. And you see that although the force increases, that is, the patient is producing force to the pedal. However, the tendon elongation stops at some point. So we know that, okay, this is likely from the deeper plantar flexors, most likely flexor hallucis longus is providing this extra force here. And then what it does to the force elongation curves and estimation of stiffness, it it sort of changes the shape of the curves, and it depends on how you then place your how you construct your tangent in the curve. And in this paper, we used 50% of MBC to have a valid value also in the injured individuals. So this is just an example that can how synergistic activity can influence tendon properties. Well, then shortly about tendon adaptations. We wrote brief sections about them, and especially the strain that is induced to the tendon by load provides a trigger for adaptations. And I just took a sketch from a recent review where that illustrates the complex mechanisms involved in mechanotransduction and signaling of the strain to the tendon cells that then provide provide the adaptation then. Besides the strain, when you do exercise, there's also increase in the metabolism, blood flow around the tendon, and within the tendon also increases. This is from a classical study from the Copenhagen group, Landberg et al., showing that the blood flow around the tendon when you do here a long-term running exercise increases and stays elevated a little bit. Both the strain and then together with the increased metabolism provides means to increase collagen synthesis. Again, here's from classic paper from Michael Chair, review paper where he summarizes the work that after acute exercise, both the indicators of collagen synthesis and breakdown are increased. If you do a chronic exercise, it takes some time before the collagen synthesis exceeds the breakdown. So that's why if you have a long inactivity period and then start again training, your tendons may rupture, as it happens in typically for 40-45-year-old males that start again playing squash or badminton or something. So there's a delicate balance in the synthesis and breakdown of collagen that provides the strength in the tendon. So what then adapts? Stiffness and Young's modulus adapt, and here's depicted that they increase with strength training especially, and high volume or high intensity strength training especially provides optimal stimulus to increase these. Also, the tendon cross-sectional area increases with habitual exercise, for example. And if we look from, across the lifespan, during the development, both tendon stiffness and Young's modulus, they increase, and then they tend to increase in aging, but then you can influence these with appropriate exercise, and then inactivity can modulate this time course as well. So there can be people with similar values of stiffness and modulus depending on their training exercise background, for example. Yeah, perhaps the one other thing to mention is that these correlate with strength across different athletic population, for example. So and also if you need to train your muscles, you train your tendon at the same time, but the time course of the adaptation is different. Then in the end, few words about future avenues, and there's lots of modeling in here. These figures are from my co-workers who are experts in multi-body dynamic modeling, where we have they have created a method where they can model any cross section of the tendon, and we are using it to model different types of the 3D tendon here. Benedicte, would you want to continue from here?
Yeah, and I think for future avenues, I think what we also discussed is that it's important to combine experimental measurements with the modeling, because from the experimental measurements you actually get like the variability within a human population, and I think it already came up in the chat. So there's a lot of variability in geometry, material properties in healthy, and especially also in pathologies. And also with training, as Taija mentioned, if you train the muscles, you will train the muscles, the muscle will get strengthened, but also your tendon will change in properties. So the modeling then can help to understand and to figure out what exactly is having which role on the tendon strains, for instance. If you change the geometry, you can see how that influences your strains, and if you change the material properties, how that influences the strains. And that has an advantage that you can actually figure out a little bit more what the mechanisms behind are, but combining it with real world data and seeing what the variability is and understanding that both these things a little bit better is one of the future directions, I think, that is important.
Thank you. This is what we plan to present to you, and now we see that there's lots of questions here. So how should we come about? Should we just go ahead and take the questions from the chat?
Yeah, if that is okay with you.
Yeah, that sounds great to us.
Yeah. Let me just go with the first one. So the stiffness of Achilles tendon is lower in individuals who have Achilles tendinopathy. How come do they feel stiffness around the tendon then? Yeah, good question. Are there clinicians here? Well, feeling is quite different than the material property. Let me, if anybody wants to answer this one, go ahead, or we can return to that. Yeah.
I just want to one of the remarks that we experience with our patients is that they feel stiffness, but sometimes it's also more located towards the muscles. So there comes the interaction with the muscles also, I think. And indeed, is it stiffness or is it a feeling of stiffness that will have, I don't think if they feel stiff that therefore the tendon will be stiffer or material around the tendon has to be stiff.
Brand asks, is there still force in the Achilles tendon at very plantar flexed ankle angles at rest? If so, how strain can be accurately calculated? Well, here my thoughts are running even to people with cerebral palsy that have altered muscle tendon length. But if we just think now that if you have a very plantar flexed condition, your tendon is slack, basically. And well, it becomes curved. It's curved there, so you can define the length. So you can actually calculate the strain, yes, but then it's the question, what's the force there? Maybe the force is more problematic than the strain in plantar flex position. What do you think, Brent?
Yeah, I was wondering, because sure, we say that it's slack, but just because it's not changing length doesn't mean it doesn't have force in it. And from an engineering point of view, the slack is when there's no force.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if
Yeah.
anyone ever did surgery where they reattach the tendon and like a ruptured tendon to see what angles there's no force. And I feel that during surgery, they always have to apply quite a lot of force to get the tendon ends to meet. So that to me suggests there's always force in the tendon. And so you're never really able to get a true estimate of slack. And therefore your strain measures might always be wrong. And across studies, if you use a different length to normalize, then your strains will differ a lot across studies.
Yeah, we considered, like people do stiffness assessment and for example, at different plantar flexion angles. So if you have it in a 90-degree, you lose the toe region, for example. So that's sort of a shows already
so
that
you definitely know where you're in the
depends.
linear region and when you're in the toe region.
Yeah,
Just the problem is you don't know the strain then if you don't know when zero force is occurring.
Yeah. I'm looking behind me. There's this poster that we did in patella tendon where we probed we pushed the tendon to see if there is a force when it's slack, like knee fully extended, and the same could be used for Achilles tendon to sort of probe this issue. Okay,
Yeah,
let's
that
move
would
on.
be cool if you could do that.
Yeah. Anna-Maria is asking, when we collected data in this study, I saw flexor hallucis longus working on the ultrasound monitor. Yes.
That
So-
was not a question, but it was really interesting to see.
Yes, so flexor hallucis longus really, some people do plantar flexion, can do plantar flexion without engaging flexor hallucis longus. You can be taught to do that. But if you just ask people to plantar flex your foot, they may or may not use flexor hallucis longus. So it's individual strategy to use that. And in rupture people, we show that flexor hallucis longus takes the function, increases its function to compensate the deficit. Rod, if he's online, his recent paper in Journal of Biomechanics shows this nicely. You showed a broad range of hysteresis for the calcaneal tendon in humans. Was there a lot of variations within studies too? Yes. So have people related this to muscular anatomy or presence of plantar muscle? Yeah, so even if the mean value was 10%, there's a huge variation within the study. So it's much more variable measure than stiffness or Young's modulus. Kayla, thank you for your comment. Paul, I wonder if the training effect decreases as age increases and the training line would be closer to aging line at higher ages. I did not draw them so perfectly. It was just a model, but
I thought it was just schematic in a way.
yeah, it was, and you're probably correct that it scales. Yeah.
Thank you, Taija.
But still, you know, elderly people can adapt, and they've been, you know, they have a good capacity to adapt.
I was thinking about I was thinking about the attenuation effect with exercise, but you're right, of course. People like me can adapt.
You still have hope.
Thank you.
Across the papers you reviewed, were Achilles tendon properties measured in men and women? Did you see studies looking at differences between them? Yes, we see differences due to our physiology and biology. Men are typically stronger, but regardless of the strength, the stiffness can be different. Now that I come to think of this issue, looking at remembering the studies in animals, they show differences in the properties of tendon, and but they are not perhaps in a similar way expressed in human in vivo measurements, where women typically show lower values of stiffness. Do you want to, Benedicte,
Take the next one.
take the next one, for example?
A wide range in Achilles tendon stiffness values are reported in literature, ranging from 184 to 2000 over 2000 Newton. Variability in experimental measurements and post-processing technique likely contributes to these differences. I agree. If you look at the literature, there's a huge variation, and it's very hard to sometimes know where this variability comes from. I think there's a lot of variability within some of the studies also, but of course not as high as the others. But as I mentioned, it really depends on where the tendon length is tracked, because that's going to have a very big influence on your strain and your stiffness and your Young's modulus, and other methodological issues. The question is also, should we somehow come up with I think, a gold standard for estimating Achilles tendon stiffness. Yes, but it's also dependent on the research question you're interested in. So, and of course the availability, I think a lot of the things are about availability of equipment. So sometimes it would be nice to have, and I think that comes back, sorry, I'm not finishing my sentences, but I think to reporting your methods in an accurate way is very important, because even a lot of the studies don't really say how they are calculating muscle force. If you use your moment arm, a fixed moment arm, or if you adjust it using the regression analysis and so on. So I think it would already help a lot if the methods are very accurately reported, and also your population will play a huge role on the variability in these stiffness methods. Estimation of a moment arm is, for instance, also very crucial and very will have a big effect on your stiffness measures.
Yeah, well, because stiffness is dependent on both material properties and morphology, would better characterization of tendon shape in these studies start to explain the variability? So for stiffness, we use the tendon elongation and force. And then for Young's modulus, then we use the tendon cross-sectional area, and that varies across the tendon length, and that can bring variability to the Young's modulus values. Yes, oh, okay, there are discussion about that one, yes. So the paper is published already, yes, okay, here you go. So tiny question, what do you think, when and how could we measure in vivo human individual strains in Achilles tendon during more complex movements like running or even sudden directional changes, where we often see ruptures in some elite athletes? Strain measurements currently, even with the current ultrasound techniques, are challenging. Benedicte, do you want to comment more on this one?
Yeah, I can definitely comment on that. We've done the running tendon strain calculations, but if you place you place the ultrasound in a lot of the cases on the muscle fascicles, and then you use the model to estimate what the tendon strains are, or the serielastic. It's not the tendon, it's the serielastic component. There are studies who track the basal tendon junction during these measurements. So that's also possible. It's already more challenging because it's one point that you track, and then during running, you measure in 2D and you have a 3D motion. So how well you can track that muscle tendon junction at one point is very, very difficult. So, and you have to track, of course, the calcaneus insertion. So there are some challenges. It is possible, but there are errors with all the other measurements too. And the more explosive you go, you have to go, of course, high enough in your in your sample frequency also to be able to track what you want to track.
Yeah, there's good discussions going on there, and I also posted their response related to the animal study that I was thinking. do you want to ask questions in person?
Well, I'll ask my question orally. Thank you so much. As great discussion in the chat. A lot of great comments I think came from this. But yeah, I guess I had maybe two questions. One was when you were talking about the training, as I kind of understood it, it was around more endurance, like running training. What do you think is like the balance of endurance training versus like kind of strength training for the muscles and in terms of rehab after Achilles ruptures? That makes sense.
Well, endurance training as per se does not provide such a good stimulus for increasing tendon properties as strength training, for example. So that's why perhaps also endurance athletes, if they want to utilize the strain energy maximally, do some high load exercises to increase the stiffness of the tendon, but not to increase the bulk of the muscle. For the rehabilitation, then there are people from Karin Silbernagel's group here, for example, who have good procedures to rehabilitate tendon problems, but there also the variability is high and not one type maybe fits for all. So that's why it would be important to, get to the details and individual level. Why are we different, and how can we optimize the load and the rehabilitation just for you? Yeah, lots of research in this area. Bas is asking, what do you think about using shear wave elastography to measure tendon stiffness? There are some now reliability studies. However, proper validative studies are scarce, and they still should be done in order for us to really understand what we can, what the elastography shear wave tells us about the tendon properties. One of my master students compared shear wave elastography to the traditional mechanical stiffness measures, but the comparison is different. It is difficult because the scales are different, and we have to use imagination how to compare them appropriately. Benedicte, do you want to add on this point?
Yeah, I just want to confirm, like at the moment, it's not 100% sure what it exactly measures. And I think there's some studies showing that it has to do with force, what you're measuring. So I think linking and better understand what it measures is important before we use it as a pure stiffness measure.
But I think it's still important to, study it and report the values. They may bring us something new, new understanding that, okay, sort of establish some baseline values too.
Any more questions? Feel free to raise your hand or unmute.
Well, it's been a great crowd and lots of questions. I really enjoyed this meeting, and I hope to see you, many of you, in Fukuoka in end of July. I will be there for the summer, and I will be bringing my kids. So it's mom combining science. So if anybody else brings kids, let's do something together. Well, my kids are big, so but anyway, yeah.
Great. Thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you both giving such a great presentation. As you can see, a lot of our members really have a strong interest in ankle biomechanics. So this really fuses our passion with the monthly meetings that we've had across the year. Thanks so much for your time. Thanks, Anne Maria. Let's give Anne Maria a round of applause for planning this wonderful conclusion to our meeting. And I will just let our president sign off with any closing messages.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I was trying to find my unmute button. Yes, just to echo the big thanks to our keynote speakers and to our committee. And I see a lot of supporters and allies, and not necessarily women or others in the group. So please, this is an open meeting. So please do sign up for IWB. I'm going to post in the chat the link. If you want to hear about events like these are open meetings, so they're not just for women in biomechanics. We host these for our entire biomechanics community. So please sign up. You'll get on the listserv to hear about future events. All right, so thank you all so much for staying a little late and for great talk. See you next time.